Okay, Unlimited. Episode whatever it is. The Podcast Roulette episode, where we don't know what we're going to speak about until right now in this moment. And I'm going to go through a little thing that we do in our business called Ideas 365. And Ideas 365 is a shared note that Leigh and I have, where the idea is if we put one concept or one idea in there per day, we can then repurpose that later for content or an idea in our business or a podcast like we're about to do right now. So I'm going to scroll through Ideas 365. Now we have quite a lot of ideas if you're looking at this on YouTube. And I'm just going to stop somewhere. Actually, Leigh, you tell me where to stop.
Keep going. Stop.
So we have the 4th of what month? The 4th of April 2023. So the 4th of April 2023. It starts with: the rarer you are, the rarer the people who share your perspective. I think there was a little bit of a Chris Williamson inspiration here. I feel we were listening to maybe him on that day. Loneliness is a kind of tax you have to pay for atoning a certain complexity of mind.
Yeah, that's just Chris Williamson ripoff, isn't it?
Yeah. There's less square footage at the top of the mountain. The air is thinner and it's harder to breathe. It's only a problem if you hate it. And then offer and pricing, the perceived likelihood of getting what you want. So there's a couple of topics there. As you can see, there's 5 different topics that we generally cover when it comes to these things. But I think a thread that comes up for me there, Leigh, I don't know if you can really see it in there, but it is the kind of loneliness versus being alone and being happy in your own company topic.
The loneliness versus the solitude.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for the help. That's what we do. We're a team.
Because they're different. Exactly. Logical Leigh over here, you know?
Mr. Logic himself. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Loneliness versus solitude.
Oh, I love it. Because they are very different, right? And I feel like solitude is one of man's superpowers. A lot of work can be done in solitude. And solitude is essentially, choosing to be on your own with yourself. Whereas loneliness is that feeling of like, I have no one. I feel like loneliness, how would we define that? Is it like a lack of love? Is it the feeling of like a lack of love? Is loneliness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absence of love.
Yeah, the absence of love. Like, loneliness is weird because in psychology, they've shown that you can be around a lot of people and still feel completely lonely. So maybe I'll deepen that even further. It's a lack of love, the absence of love, and the absence of like feeling understood, maybe as well. Because I feel like that could make someone feel lonely even in a large group of people. So that's kind of differentiating the two. Solitude is chosen, and loneliness generally isn't. It's probably more of a subconscious pattern coming up. And there's probably blocks and things getting in the way that lead you to that point. But in my own constitution, I love solitude for a couple of reasons. One, because I know there's so much work to be done in the solitude. I've found a lot of what's the word? Like, I found myself a lot in solitude. But also for me, solitude also comes up in my constitution of when I come up in challenging scenarios or situations, I can recluse and just go into solitude because things can get complex and they are challenging to dig through with people. And when overwhelm comes up, I can go into solitude as well. And it's a double-edged sword there, because I was having this conversation with you the other day around certain topics, and solitude, some people can see that as a bad thing, like reclusing from challenging scenarios, but I find I get the resolve when I go there. When I go into solitude, I'll pull away from a certain scenario, even though it leaves the other person or people feeling like, oh, Leigh's absent. But I'll find the resolve there. So I think it depends on how deep your relationship is with yourself and what frameworks and systems you have in place when you are in solitude. But it's 100% one of man's superpowers if you can be okay in solitude. One of the things that we see a lot is like people aren't comfortable enough to go to the solitude. They're not like comfortable enough with themselves to go to the solitude. So I think a lot of people are missing out there in terms of how comfortable they are and how much solitude they give themselves. But yeah, I love it. But I think it's important to establish the difference between the loneliness and the solitude. Sure. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I have lots and lots of thoughts on that. Let me gather them for a second. I don't personally feel like without solitude, I wouldn't understand myself at all. And that would lead me to a lot of outsourcing in my life, like outsourcing my power, outsourcing my love, outsourcing all of the things that I actually have control over, because I need other people in order to feel a certain way. So, one of my constitutions as well is being misunderstood. I hate being misunderstood. But that comes from a deep inner standing. I had this moment the other day, which is really quite bizarre now, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I was having a dream, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I just got my phone out and I wrote something down. I don't know if I was here in Bali or if I was back in Australia. I can't quite remember. But on my notes, I wrote inner standing. That was all that came through to me in that dream, was inner standing instead of understanding. And the only way that we can get inner standing, which is the understanding of ourselves internally, what's going on in here, is from spending time in solitude. And I've had such a contrast in my careers of this, because in cycling, yes, it was a team sport, but there was a lot of time spent alone. A lot of time spent alone, doing hard things alone to seemingly no end at times. Like when nobody was watching, the training that I was doing had to reach certain level and certain numbers for me to reach a certain point in my career. And that's when I really got to understand the ego, the voice in my head, the little voice in my head that was telling me, maybe don't push so hard this day, it's cold, it's raining, it's icy, it's whatever, all of the little things that would come up. So when we have inner standing, we no longer outsource, we're actually in-source. And that was kind of the download that I got on the way here. It's like, okay, well, when we're in-source, we're actually connected to our purpose, to what it is that we want to do in the world. And I know that's a very woo-woo spiritual way of putting it, but with inner standing comes understanding, because I don't really care for loneliness. Like I'm kind of happy to be lonely. You know, from time to time I'll hear people talk about, oh, I don't really have many friends or don't have much friends, but I don't either, and I'm kind of happy with that, to be honest. I know a lot of people, and in our industry, again, like speaking, not even just our industry, but speaking of my career so far, cycling, lots of time alone, really got to understand myself, to the polar opposite of doing, you know, in my first year, 70, 80 clients a week in the barbershop. Very little time for myself, very little time allocated towards inner standing, because the culture that I got pulled into was the complete opposite of what I just did for 4 or 5 years. So that was a complete pendulum swing. There wasn't much, balance in it. And I still struggle with the word balance, but it's the word that is needed right here. There wasn't much balance in it between finding the moments of solitude for myself again that I needed, that I got when I was a cyclist. And also, caveat, I'm also an only child. I have 2 half brothers, but I didn't live with them full time. I only went to their house at the weekend when I was a kid. So like 5 days a week, 6 days a week, I was in my own company at my mother's house. And when we got to a certain age, I didn't really go to their house anymore. So like, I've been on this solitude and loneliness journey for quite some time, and to be honest, bro, I absolutely love it. I love my own company. I need my own company to decompress. If I don't have my own company, I don't feel grounded. I don't feel like I've given myself the space to understand what's coming up for me. And ultimately, I feel like that was one of the things in the hair space that I really struggled with, because, you know, when I actually got to understand myself, when I got the inner standing of what was really going on, I could see it then. And once I could see it, I could no longer unsee it. And then I realized, okay, why am I seeing 70, 80 people a week? Because I'm seeking validation from seeing all these people, because all of them tell me how great I am at doing their hair. But now I no longer need that. I actually need more time for integration. And, you know, in-source, inner standing, integration, all of these things are very closely connected. And if we don't give ourselves the space and the time to integrate, to basically go into greatness, that's one thing that we like to coin as well, then we're continually going to be just confused and feeling misunderstood, because I feel like the reason why I have the trigger of being misunderstood is because I was misunderstood for quite a long time, because I didn't understand myself.
That's massive. It's interesting looking at the family dynamic, isn't it? You know, I think that surprises me actually, that you enjoy your, or, you know, quote unquote loneliness or solitude, being an only child. That's really interesting. For me, I come from a bigger family. You know, I'm one of 4, and the noise of such a big household, I think, led me to enjoy my solitude. And it's really interesting now looking back at like all the activities I did growing up, you know, whether it was sports or music or this, I would always go more towards the single person thing, like somewhere where I could just kind of zone in on my own. Team sports were cool, but I was like, oh, it's just more like noise and more people. And I already have the big team at home. You know, I've got the big team, and it was fantastic, beautiful. But I think it then pushed me towards a bit more solitude when I got the chance. And I crave it. Well, I craved it for a long time. I'm so fortunate now. I get to have a lot of solitude, and it's beautiful, and I love it. But I love that reflection from the barbershop. You know, I relate that to my scenarios. Like, I think that's where I got to in the industry, was this feeling like I was constantly out, you know, expressing outwards, projecting out with more people, more conversations. And I got to a point in my career where I was just really quiet. I just didn't walk. And that was me trying to include some solitude in my day to day, because I didn't really have it anywhere else. You know, it was long days. You're up, we're off, we're doing 10, 15 different people a day, you know, and up to the times where we're working 5, 6, 7 days a week, there was no solitude time allocated. And then I think subconsciously I was just trying to find that through my day. So I would just purposely wouldn't talk to like 3, 4, 5 clients of the day. Not that I didn't like them or not that I didn't want to have the conversation. It was like I just needed some quiet time with myself. And I could find that, you know, I was trying to find that while I was doing what I was doing. So that's a really interesting reflection right there. But these days, what is it? It looks like I try and find as many quiet moments as possible. And, you know, in that solitude, I try and have a bit of contemplation as well. And, you know, I meditate, you know, at least once a day. I'm trying to do it twice a day now. Once in the morning, once after lunch, just to really get that time with myself. And even there's Richard Rudd from the Gene Keys. He's got a fantastic app called the Triple Flame, and set alarms on it for like 3, 6 or 9 minute contemplations every 3 hours, which is really cool. And it just reminds you to stop and have some solitude, just some time. And it could be guided or you could just do it on your own. But one of the things that we hear a lot, especially in the coaching space, and our massive exposure to just gen pop, like through the hair industry, is a lot of people aren't comfortable with it. They're like, oh, I can't meditate. Oh, I hate being on my own. Oh, it's like, I don't think it's the loneliness that gets them. I think it's the relationship with self that gets them. They're actually not comfortable with what comes up in their mind. And they don't really have systems around dealing and navigating what comes up in their mind. So I have absolute compassion for people that don't want to choose solitude. But I really think that we're missing out on a superpower there, and something that can ultimately set us up for freedom in the long run as well. Because, you know, relating back to the quote, the Chris Williamson quote, you know, what was it? The loneliness atones. Yeah, the tax of loneliness atones a certain complexity of mind, or something like that. Because what he means by that is, and this is why it pays to become comfortable with the solitude, is that as you develop your complexity of mind, you are now escaping or elevating your way from the common into a place of the uncommon. And when you're more uncommon than you are common, it's exactly in the name. There's going to be less people there and less minds that actually think the way you do, and that can seem lonely. And I think that's what he's getting at there, is the more you develop your mind and you start to understand the world and understand your own world, it can seem lonely because there are less people there. And what I've done with that, and I'm sure you've done as well, is you know, reframe that into solitude. I just get more opportunities for solitude, which is actually a blessing, in my opinion. I think it's beautiful. 100%. So yeah, loneliness is the kind of tax that you have to pay to atone a certain complexity of mind. So meaning, like, the more complex that your mind gets, the more advanced, say, you become on your like spiritual journey or what, and everyone's looks a bit differently. What you'll start to realize is certain friend groups or even family that you once hung around and seeked a lot of, I guess, comfort in, no longer give you the same comfort because you don't relate to these people anymore. It's kind of how I feel right now when I go to a club or a bar and I look around and it's like, I don't want to talk to anybody here because I just don't feel like I'm on the same wavelength. We're not on the same frequency. And once upon a time I was. So it's a really interesting social experiment now being here in Bali because, you know, you have a lot of that. There's like, you know, you go to all of the day clubs and people are here on holiday and it's like everyone's drinking and partying and there's a lot of that. But
we've kind of found our own haven in another space where it's like a co-working space, more focus on health and biohacking, and it's got all of the same things, but just with a different group of people who are into different things and want to do different things with their lives. But yeah, I feel like it might be rarer to meet people with the same perspective as you atone that certain complexity of mind, but it's worth the wait, in my opinion. And there's, in everyone's hero's journey, and everyone's journey through their awakening, essentially, you're going to have what Chris also talks about is the lonely chapter. And he spoke about that with Stephen, where it's like the lonely chapter where it might feel isolating. I personally, I guess when I look back at it, I didn't really experience it because my journey there started with the Kerwin Ray space, and there was 300 people who were going through a similar thing. But it wasn't until I came back to my everyday regular environment that I realized, oh, I'm no longer the same person now, and I look at the world in a different way. I see things in a different way. To the people here, this has a time limit. This has a time frame that I can be here, unless somebody comes on the journey with me. And we see this a lot in intimate relationships. You know, a lot of intimate relationships can go separate ways because there's a 1 degree of separation, and sometimes it's more than 1 degree. It's many degrees, and then they just keep going further and further apart. So when one person in a relationship is doing a lot of understanding as well as understanding, and the other person is just not quite there yet, that can be a really tricky bridge to gap or to close. So yeah, it is quite a complex topic, and you know, to speak at another piece that's here on the note, it's like there's less square footage at the top of the mountain, and the air is thinner and it's harder to breathe. But the people who climb the mountain, and look, I kind of like that analogy, I kind of don't, because it assumes that there's people higher up than there are. There's just kind of like a hierarchy to it. Now look, if we were to make it linear, and we were to make it horizontal, and we were to make it random, there's just certain circles everywhere for like different groups and different people to fit into who are vibrating at a different frequency. Because that's exactly what it is. Like we get to a point in our lives where we, you know, our interests change, our frequency changes, how we see the world changes, our spirituality changes, and no longer do we fit into the box that we were in or the circle that we were in. We have to find another one. Or we say, oh, that one looks like it suits me a little bit more. I'm going to go over there and try that out. And we've been doing it our whole lives. Think about school. Like, you know, you find your friends group in school, and everyone just naturally kind of finds the group of people that they hang out with without it being like too much of a technical process. It's a very much spiritual process, actually, when you think about it, because it's done energetically. It's done through frequency. But I feel like I heard this quote years ago. One of the guys in K2 said it to me, and he said, music is the space between the notes. So music is the space between the notes. If it's just one continual note, just a you don't get music. You don't get something that's nice to hear. And that's the analogy to busyness. If you're just staying busy, outsource, and you're not giving yourself space to be brilliant, and that's another fucking brilliant thing that Phil Nosworthy said at the Gary Vee event. It's like, are you even giving yourself space to be brilliant? Music is the space between the notes. to make music, essentially to do anything that's worthwhile or beautiful in your life, you need to give yourself space. Now look, I could do with taking that advice a little bit better myself. Because I still battle with some of these demons. I sit with myself and I start to get a little bit uncomfortable. So then I do work and I distract myself at work. And now it's no longer hair work. It's a different type of work. But yeah, I had quite this pendulum swing when I moved from cyclist, spending a lot of time by myself in solitude, into, hairdresser, barber, speaking to 10, 15 people a day, as well as other people's clients, as well as work colleagues. So you're looking at like anywhere between 20 to 50 people a day that you interact with, versus when I was a cyclist, when I was training for big periods of time, I used to go to Spain and be by myself, me and my granddad, for like 6 months, just the two of us. And once in a while we might meet people for dinner. Crazy, big difference.
I think this speaks a lot to, there's a great reframe, I feel like, when the loneliness thing comes up, and to keep people on the path, because I feel like it's very easy once you start to go on that transformation and things start to change and your circle starts to change, people start to drop away and there may be less people around you. It's very easy to quit at that point. It's very easy to go back and just be like, oh, it was more comfortable what I was doing before, so I'll just go back there. But, the reframe is then stepping into leadership. A great leader is who they are, regardless of the scenario. And I had an experience of this earlier this year when I went back to the UK. I just bird's eye viewed the whole thing, and I was really me the whole time. This year I set out to not drink, and that's great. It's been a whole year, and not do this. And I worked the way I did, and I just said the things that I normally say and had the conversations that I had, and didn't feel bad for it or didn't hold back on it. And because I could have, I could have slipped back into what was comfortable and just not being me. And because it did, it didn't feel lonely, but it felt like I was in a lane of one, not from a hierarchical standpoint, just because of like, well, yeah, I do think quite differently now to a lot of people. But that, I feel like, then starts to come into leadership. And can you be who you say you are and who you want to be at all times, regardless of what's going on around you, whether there's 1,000 people around you or whether there's 3 people around you, one person, if it's just you, can you be that person? And, it's amazing what happens. It's amazing that, the aftermath of that, it really is an eye-opener, and I believe everything's energetic, and it does rub off. And I feel like it did rub off on a few people, which was really a beautiful thing to see. But fast forward that, I actually had an experience of that. Only a few days ago, I went to Spilt Milk Festival here in Australia. There was 35,000 people there. And I posted up a couple of little highlight videos on my Instagram story. And I got a few messages from people saying, how on earth did you do that? Like, how did you stay you being there? And it really hit me. I was like, yeah, wow. Like, I had no issue being me when I was there. Didn't feel like I needed a drink. Wasn't really too fazed by the whole scenario. Now, were those... It was a little bit terrifying looking around thinking, wow, there's a lot of people here I don't resonate with. But I was just okay in my own world. And I think that comes from trust. It's trusting that, me being me is okay for me. And that's great. I don't really need anyone else's approval to be me. And I heard another great thing on a podcast the other day. It's like, not letting that outside world really affect you. It's for those who are still affected by the world, their immediate world around them aren't really that free. You really know that you're starting to become free when that world doesn't affect you anymore. See, I would say even up to a 1 year, 18 months ago, that probably might have still affected me in a weird way. I might have got a bit frustrated. I've been like, oh, look at these people. Oh, what are they doing with their lives? And, Now I don't. I just have compassion, and me being me, I'm like, who knows? It might affect one person, it might affect none, might affect 10. Who knows? But I think a great sign that you really are starting to come into freedom and an inner standing is like you can just be who you are at all times in those moments, no matter how lonely it feels, and no matter how much solitude that comes from that. And there's work to be done there. It's what I've experienced is it's really easy to stay regulated by not being pulled around by that energy, not being worried about being misunderstood or sticking out like a sore thumb. Very easy to stay regulated and coming away from it not feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. That's one thing that I really, really noticed. So yeah, if my kind of advice for anybody going on that journey, stepping into doing the inner work, working on yourself, there is going to be the lonely chapter, but that's a fantastic opportunity to really step into it and own it, regardless of what's going on around you. And that there is the work. I think there's the most work is to be done in that moment. The most freedom is to be had in that space. And then, it's an interesting journey from there.
Totally. And I feel like each and every individual has to feel ready to go on that journey of inner standing and understanding themselves. But it really is the doorway to authenticity. And a quote that I put on Threads a few weeks ago was, when you start expressing yourself authentically, you will lose people from your life. Like you'll lose people the way that they've currently known you up to now could have been inauthentic. So when you express yourself authentically, you might lose those people, but it's better to lose those than it is to lose yourself in the pursuit of just trying to fit in everywhere, because we're all individual, we're all unique. I don't feel the need to force friendships, force conversations. Even over here in Bali right now, we're at this health club and gym, and if a conversation starts with somebody naturally, great, but I'm not going out of my way to talk to people. I'm quite happy just having, I go there for the solitude. I find solitude in the gym. I find solitude in certain activities that I do in my life. And, we do a lot of things. You and I speak every day, so I don't feel lonely ever. We have our coaching group, we have AMP, speak to those guys very frequently. I have Hannah, speak to her very frequently. I have really solid people around me. And, another way to look at it, that solitude eventually, when we do the inner standing through solitude, we understand who we are, which allows us to express ourselves authentically, which helps us not lose ourselves, which ultimately gives us better relationships with the people that we do hang out with and who we're around, because no longer do we have the exhaustion of wearing a mask. And one thing I recognized pretty early on in the hair space when I was in my hair days was that the precedents that I set with people, clients-wise, ended up being exhausting, because then they knew me as a certain person, and then every time they came in, they expected a similar conversation. A particular example comes up when I think about Conor McGregor. Back in 2017, when Conor McGregor was in his heyday, people would come into the barber shop and speak to me about Conor McGregor quite a lot. And then, the next conversation would be that when I see them 3-4 weeks later, it's almost like they want to pick up where we left off 3-4 weeks ago with the same energy, when I could be feeling a complete different way based on a number of factors. And I wasn't doing myself any favors. My lifestyle wasn't great at the time. I would work myself into the ground throughout the week, go out drinking at the weekend, drink myself into oblivion, and repeat the cycle. And it was, slowly but slowly just burning away at the candle, until it got to a point where it just wasn't sustainable anymore. It wasn't, there was no longevity in it. So a lot of it comes down to how we see things and how we are labeling things, in my opinion, because to label it as loneliness is a distraction from going towards the solitude. Because when we're labeling it as loneliness, and look, this is not to like say that people don't get lonely, because there's definitely the adverse as well. I just haven't fully experienced it just because of how I see the world. Like, for example, that Simon Sinek podcast with Stephen when he said he was lonely. Now, when I hear someone like Simon Sinek say he's lonely, I believe it, you know, because he goes to the depths, I would imagine, of thinking about it appropriately and actually giving it the time and giving it the solitude, giving it the inner standing to know, actually, you know what, I would really like human connection. And with all of this being said, human connection is super important. It's really important, but aligned human connection that we can resonate with, that we feel good with, is important. Not just any human connection. Sometimes any human connection can actually do us worse long term. Like you were speaking about in previous podcasts, it's the Stoicism versus the Epicureanism. Now, I'd love for you to explain what Epicureanism is again, but it's doing, from my understanding, it is doing the things in the short term that have a long-term downfall. You know, obsessing in, say, driving ourselves towards the material or the short-term pleasures, but they have long-term negative outcomes, essentially. So, like, you know, for example, going out drinking and getting pissed at the weekend is a perfect example of it, because we're seeking the short-term pleasure and the escapism, but it puts us into a worse place a couple of days later, and the very following day. So it's a kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy that's playing out unconsciously. But when we can just push past the uncomfortable part, everything gets a whole lot easier. You know, when you learn to say no, like once, it's like, oh, I can say no? Cool. And I saw one of my coaches share this thing. You know that thing when Mr. Bean learned the middle finger and he was going around on the car and he was doing all these ones? And it was like when you come out of your people pleaser stage like too hard, and it was just like Mr. Bean going around like doing all the middle fingers. That's what it feels like. On the other side of it, there is joy, there is freedom, there's more meaning in your life, and that's what I've experienced personally. And now I can go into situations, you know, for example, the other night we went out for dinner with one of Hannah's friends, and there's her and another friend, so there was me and these three girls, and I was quite happy to just sit there and like not really get too involved. You know, like in the past I would have wanted to be the life of the party and bring in the jokes and bring in the fun, and I can be that person, but like when it's necessary. But I can also just sit and not say too much, still be friendly, still get involved once in a while, but not have to seek something, because I've already sought it in myself. I've already gone to the depths. I already understand myself at a much deeper level, and the more understanding that we do, the more understanding we can have for other people as well. Because a pattern that I've recognized is we're all very similar. We're not one of one unicorns, like, you know, like when I don't know who says it, but someone says you're not fucking special. Who's that, Leigh? Who says that? You're not fucking special. We all feel these things.
Aiden, the runner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen to me. You're not special. But yeah. What a couple of things I'll just add before we kind of round out that point is, you know, it's really important to think about what you're making it mean as well. Like, you know, when someone says, "Oh, I'm lonely," they'll put that in negative, you know. And so what are you making lonely mean? What are you making that mean about you? Are you making it mean you're a bad person? Are you making it mean nobody cares about you? Are you making it mean nobody loves you? Are you making it mean you're just so unique, you can't find anybody like you? Like, it's really important to think about what we're making it mean. Now, on the flip of that, one of the ways to soften, I guess, the transition and that grace period is what you said, which was massive value, is try and find a crowd or a crew that, will do it with you, because environment is everything, right? We know that, you become who you surround yourself with. And like you said, K2, there's 300 people doing pretty much the same thing you were doing, or have done it already, gone through that period. So there was support. Now, if you feel like you're someone that is not going to be able to handle the loneliness or the transition period, I find some people to help you through that transition, whether it's a coaching group, whether it's a mentorship group, whether it's just a community circle of like-minded people, or a thinkers group, whatever it is. Try and find those people and hang around them, because that immediately eradicates the loneliness, and it also facilitates the support for the growth and any objections that you might have moving through it. So there's lots there. I think it just really depends what we're making the loneliness mean about ourselves, and then really just getting tactical about it then, and thinking, okay, well, how can I mitigate the issues moving through that? But to miss out on the solitude and run away from it, I think is running away from a massive upside and a massive tool that we can utilize in our lives.
Yeah, well, we need to give ourselves space in order to be brilliant, or great at what it is that we can offer to the world. And if we don't do that, eventually what I've realized is that the universe or God or whatever you want to call it forces you to do it. There's divine interventions that get put in place. And if you don't listen, things will keep happening. Things will keep happening. And that they manifest in multiple different ways that might seem like accidents. They might seem like all sorts of things, but they are course correction activities. Because once we have the download, once we can see it, and this is a very spiritual way of looking at it, but once we can see it, our environment, the 5D environment, the stuff that we can't see, the energetics of the environment pick up on that. So when we know something and we don't do something based on that now new knowing, we get course corrected all of the time. It's like something will happen. Oh, is this for you? Is this for you? Is this for you? The questions will keep coming up. Things will keep happening to give you the opportunity and give you the forced space in order to come to the conclusion that you already deep down know about.
Yeah. And one of my mentors, Paul Check, I've done some courses with, he's got the 4 doctors principle. And one of the doctors is Dr. Quiet.
Sure.
There's Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. And he said, you've got to be looking at what are you allocating to those 4 areas? What are you doing for diet? What are you doing that's quiet? What's happy making? And what are you doing for movement? And the reason he breaks it up like that, he was like, because if you neglect any one of those, that doctor will come and find you eventually. So if you're not allocating some time to Dr. Quiet will come and find you and make you be quiet, which is really interesting. And that plays out so much in life. People that never allocate solitude or quiet time eventually have to be quiet, because Dr. Quiet comes and gets you.
Yeah, and that manifests in really crazy different ways. There's a book called You Can Heal Your Life as well by Louise Hay, and it kind of explains all of the different ailments and different things that happen to people, and it connects it to emotional experiences essentially. So for example, a lot of hairdressers probably end up getting similar illnesses later in life because there's a lack of duality in the work that we do. So again, Dr. Quiet comes along and forces a certain illness in order to kind of counteract what has been happening up to a certain point. And again, very spiritual. Some of the people who aren't so spiritual who might listen to this might think, what the hell are you talking about? But read the book. I would suggest be open. Listen to the book if you don't like reading it, because the worst time to try and fix something like this is when it's already happened. And if we're going to take a reactive approach to life versus a proactive approach to life, a lot different. There's a lot different outcomes. And once I've started prioritizing, myself, my health, my solitude, giving myself space to find what really does matter to me, a lot more of the things that I genuinely want actually start coming my way. So I would argue that it is essential. It is essential. A lot of the time, the only time people get quiet time is when they're sleeping. And up to the moment of sleep, the phone screen is in their face. Blue light, absorbing information. These days we're bombarded, absolutely bombarded from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep with marketing, messages, all sorts. And you know what? We partake in it because it's just the way the world works right now, and it's the way we all survive. But it's really important not to get too caught up in the noise and to find the quiet, whatever that looks like for you.
Nice. Well, on that moment of quiet, what's the next point? What have we got next?
What's the next point? Well, that's kind of covered most of the points, to be honest. There was... That was it. That was it for that day. And I mean, look, we don't have to drag it on either. I mean, look, it's if you feel like we've kind of covered everything there. There was one that says it's only a problem if you hate it. That's something that we kind of speak about a lot as well. Things are only really a problem if we hate them. A lot of the time people will serve and have served me up their opinion on like what I do with my life. Oh, you work too much, or whatever it is, or you work too much, or you do too much of this, or you do too much of that. But it's only a problem if I hate it. I don't hate it right now, so like it's not a problem. Same thing with all of the stuff we just spoke about. When you hear this podcast, we speak about like, our experiences in the barbershop and in the salon, and in business and in life. It's only a problem if you hate it.
That's what I love about Gary Vee. He says that all the time. If you are already happy, my advice isn't for you. But judging off of Gen Pop, most people aren't that happy. If you go around and ask people, percentage are you happy, or not even happy, do you have joy? Is your life full of joy? I don't know, maybe I'm biased. Maybe I have a biased set of people that I speak to, but most people aren't. So that's where we come at it from. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we've experienced those things too, and this is what's worked for us. But if you're already joyous and you're just living a life, absolute life of your dreams, which a lot comes down to perspective, you could probably flick that switch literally tomorrow if you wanted to. But if you're already in that place, this ain't for you. And that's the aim of the game, really. I think North Star, to be free on so many levels. One of the biggest ones is to be free of our own minds. It's massive.
And it ties in nicely to the whole loneliness and solitude thing. Loneliness is only a problem if you hate it. Solitude is only a problem if you hate it. It's a fucking good thing if you don't.
Yeah. And I had a great revelation the other day about I was speaking to somebody about awareness. They were asking me lots of questions around, how'd you do this? How'd you do this? How'd you do this? it's a lot of it comes with awareness, and solitude allows me to develop my awareness, especially with meditation, right? It allows me to develop what's going on. And I was really thinking about it in like, if I was to draw out my awareness, what would it be? And it's really my way of getting between me and my ego. Like, it's like, my awareness sits between me and my ego. My awareness is to look at what's actually going on there. Oh, this has happened. That's what my ego wants to do. So in the middle here is my awareness, and getting in between the two is magical. It really is. And that muscle can only be, well, for me, a lot of the time, only really strengthened in solitude.
Yeah.
And it really is. I think it's a skill, right? Like, it's a skill that you can develop, and develop it in a healthy way in solitude. It's yeah. It's cool.
It's like the connection point, or the bridge between the objective and the subjective. You know, like the objective is the reality of what's going on, and the subjective is our opinion of the reality and how we see the world. And like it's the in-between space, or the journey of bridging that gap, is where a lot of awareness comes in. And being able to see both sides, you know, like awareness is such a, if we don't ever find time for ourselves, it's very hard to develop our own awareness, because we just borrow everything from everybody else. And that's how we've learned as kids. It's how we learn to walk. It's how we learn to talk. It's how we learn to do anything. It's from somebody else. So it's really important when we do learn all of these things, and we become very competent in them, and they become very consciously competent, that we take time to discover what's good for us on a personal level, rather than just what we think we need to do. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of allocate and give yourself time to figure out.
And a massive one for people that are trying to develop their awareness, and they're struggling with it. Sometimes what I experience with myself is, you're not always going to like what you find. Once you get in between, you know, the objective and the subjective, and you get between yourself and your ego, you're not always going to like what you find. And one of the bits of magic there is just learning not to judge it. You know, if you can get in between everything and not judge it, you'll free yourself a lot faster. See, where a lot of people struggle is, they'll say go into a meditation or whatever, and a thought will come in, and they don't actually really like the thought. So they'll start to judge it, and then, this is all too hard, I want to get out of this. And you compound that with like 5 to 10 thoughts that you don't actually like, that you have, and you start to judge them. The awareness will never grow, really, and your freedom will really never grow, because you're constantly judging yourself. And what happens when more judgment comes in? It gets more uncomfortable. What happens when a lot of people get uncomfortable? They look for another distraction, and the cycle then repeats itself. And that's where a lot of people say, well, I can't be on my own. I can't meditate. I can't do that. It's like, what you're really saying is you don't like what comes up. And then when you don't like it, you judge it. And when you judge it, you need to find distraction from it. And the cycle continues. So not judging it is massive. And when you could get to the point of not judging it, what you then realize is, wow, I get the opportunity to change this tomorrow. I don't like that about me, how I've done that in the past. But the cool thing is that doesn't have to be me tomorrow. And you can literally choose to change it tomorrow. And that's the really beautiful thing of awareness. It's going, wow, okay. Whoa, I thought like that. Oh, all right. I'm not going to judge it, but I am going to let it go. And I'm going to consciously work on a new version of that tomorrow. And that's okay.
Yeah. With all of this comes responsibility. And I think that's also something that is widely avoided. Because once we know better, we then have the responsibility to do better. And whether we do better or not, we know it internally. And that is a battle that I see a lot of people go through, and I've been through it myself. But the more time we spend in the trenches, and the more time we spend in, say, you know, quote unquote, the lonely chapter, the more we understand what's for us and what's not for us. And, you know, we spoke about this when it comes to planning as well. It's really important to know these things, because then you won't have that responsibility debate going on in the mind, because essentially that's what's happening for a lot of people, in my opinion. Because we know we shouldn't really have the drink, or we know, like, look, let's be fucking real. Alcohol is just straight up not good for you. Like, it's a made up thing. It's a monetized made up thing. It doesn't grow out of the ground. It's not like a natural thing that's good for humans. We're not supposed to drink it. It's an escapism. So deep down somewhere, we know that it's not good, but we still do it. So there's not much self-love in that. This is hilarious, right? Because as soon as we started recording the podcast today, I just want to put this out there. There is construction site behind me. There is drills going off. There's dogs barking. It is all fucking happening right now. But up to now, it's been perfectly silent all morning. How good is that? But that is just perfect for what's happening right now in this conversation, because that is the distractions and the noise of the world trying to pull my attention off course. That is exactly what we're talking about. It's very easy then to fall, when we don't like the idea of taking responsibility, it's easy to go in the opposite way, which is distraction and just coping mechanisms for how we really truly feel internally.
Or one step further, just quitting it completely, right? Like, what I see there is the great, like, freedom formula is essentially, you know, you care, but you don't worry. It's like, all right, those little noises in the background. We know when we put this podcast out, it's like there could be little noises in the background. Do we care about it? Yeah, of course. It could always be better. Like that, we know now when we debrief, oh, that could be better. Do we worry? No. Because what would the worry do? The worry could get people to quit completely. That's it. Bugger this episode off. It was rubbish. Get rid of it. Yeah. Or for what? Just a couple of little noises in the background. Like that's not that free. It's not freeing. Why? Because you're judging it and yourself again, which is more pressure, more overwhelm, and looking for a distraction. Because what are you going to do when you quit the episode? Just go and find a distraction to take away the overwhelm. Like, I'm not directing that at you personally, but that's what a lot of people would do. It's so beautiful. That freedom formula is just so beautiful. But it's like, but that yeah, do we care? Yeah, of course we care. But like, we're not going to worry about that. We're not going to let that define this podcast or our lives or ourselves. It's like, we just can't, it's just not a very freeing way to live, and it's just excess weight that we carry around. So yeah, it's beautiful in that moment. It's fine. It's all fine.
Exactly. And it's choosing what to see in each and every moment, right? Like, because my responsibility and my commitment this morning was to do the podcast, and we don't actually even have time for the rest of the week to really do it. So regardless of the circumstance, what I've done is I've controlled the environment as much as I possibly could. I'm sitting in a room with the curtains closed, with the door closed, with my iPad on a bloody suitcase in the corner of a room to try and get as much quiet time as possible. Yet there's still noise and distractions in the background. And that in itself is kind of like a meditative practice. And that in itself is just letting go of the things that I can't control. And within solitude and within the loneliness, a lot more of that stuff comes to the surface. Because if I can't control it, well, I can just look at that and I can let that distract me. Or I can think, okay, well, what can I control? I can control having a great conversation with Leigh. I can control giving as much value to this podcast as possible. I can control not letting that thought consume me. It has popped up into my mind a few times throughout the podcast, especially as it's all happening at once. There's a drill, some other bloody noise, and a dog barking all at once. I'm like, oh wow, now it's really ramping up. But now it's relatively quiet again. which is bizarre, right? But again, all divine intervention, all stuff that is being pushed my way to challenge the conversation that we're having right now. That's how I feel with it. It's like, oh, isn't that interesting? But, you know, I've been in the mental state in the past where I've been like, no, the conditions aren't perfect. We can't do it. And there is no perfect conditions. The only perfect condition is doing the thing, like actually doing it. And who cares? You know, like, we want to give you guys the permission as well, like, to know that things don't have to be perfectly polished or finished. Like, just do the things. Do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so freeing. So freeing. And like, what do we know about overwhelm? You know, if you let those things stress you out too much, that stress will come in, cortisol will get released in the body, that'll dampen your cognition, and then all of a sudden our quality of conversation goes down, the value goes down, and then we're having a shit episode regardless.
Yeah. And then that could actually, you know, if that's how I let it go, that would confirm to myself the beliefs that I had in the first place. And that in itself is self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's just not a great way to live life. I've recognized that at this point.
Yeah. And the pattern continues, right? It doesn't break the pattern. Therefore, we don't change the behavior. And like Hormozy says, if no behaviors, you didn't learn anything.
Exactly.
That's basically a great learner. An intelligent person, the faster you can realize and change your behaviors, the more intelligent you're going to become in life. And again, I speak of intelligence not from a hierarchical thing, but in terms of like what you can do for yourself and how to manage life. And I love that, you know, if no behaviors change, you didn't really learn anything. And that's a constant practice, and that takes awareness to get in between yourself and the ego, and choose how you're gonna respond to that moment. It's a beautiful practice.
Yeah, well, look, if you look at responding, right, like responsibility, if you look at the word responsibility, when you break it down, it's our ability to respond. And we have a responsibility in every moment, and how we show up and how we respond in all the moments in our lives is important. Now, I had this conversation the other day with somebody about Bali, right? And this is a really interesting thing, Leigh, that I haven't spoken to you about yet. But someone said to me, oh, Bali will spit you up and or chew you up and spit you out. You know, like, you're going to do a lot of like deep work over there, and you're going to see yourself and this and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, just for the most part, projection. But meant in a nice way, you know. And I had a conversation with Hannah around it afterwards, and I was like, look, I'm at the stage in my life where I'm not avoidant of responsibility anymore. I have been in the past, but I'm actually at a stage where like I'm welcoming the lessons. So if Bali is to chew me up and spit me out, I'm like, bring it on, because like I'm actually not trying to avoid looking at things anymore. If something comes to the surface, I can look at it and be like, okay, this needs to change. Cool. Awesome. Let's work through this. Let's move through it. Whereas, you know, in the past, that wasn't always the case. And plus, for me to completely associate with that advice or with that statement could affect my whole experience over here. Just because somebody had that experience themselves where they hadn't looked at their own stuff, and then they came here and it went Pete Tong. It doesn't mean it's going to happen for me. So like I kind of took the advice in, and I thought, nice, I could see how that would happen. Yeah, cool. But I'm not going to be scared by it. I'm going to welcome it, and I'm going to take responsibility for it. And my ability to respond to it now when it comes up is going to be approached from a positive place rather than a negative place. It's going to be approached from abundance and acceptance rather than fear and lack.
Because that could upset your, like you say, upset your experience by you just being on edge all the time, just waiting for the thing to poke its head around the corner. Oh, is it today? Like, you're constantly being in that fear of like, oh, is today the day that it's going to chew me up? It's like,
No, I've course corrected. I feel like I've course corrected a lot of my actions in my life. And the ones that come up now would have to be like extremely deep and profound for me to like be thrown off course. Like all the little ones that come up, which could be potentially big ones for someone else, are kind of like, oh yeah, no, I've seen that part of me already. I understand like that because I've given myself the space and the time to do some understanding on that. And there has been times where I've listened to the signs, and there has been times where I've gone against the signs, but now I'm in a position to I guess hold myself accountable. And that, you know, honestly, the thing is, like, when we give ourselves that space, we end up having a conversation with ourselves. But sometimes you got to wait long enough, and you got to go there often. So the last point on that note was offer and pricing. It's a complete change of topic. So you can see with Ideas 365 how it just goes from something really spiritual and profound into like something a bit more tangible. Offer and pricing, the perceived likelihood of getting what you want. So I think it's like the link between offer and pricing. I don't know if you put this in, Leigh, or if I did. I can't remember. But essentially, the more you pay for an offer, the more expectation comes, and the perceived likelihood of getting the result is increased. So like, for example, if we paid 100 grand to a coach for him to make us 200 grand or $1 million, because we've paid a large amount of money, the pricing is in a high price point. The perceived likelihood of us actually getting the result is a lot higher due to the value that we now attach to that offer, to that product, to whatever it is that we're doing. So for example, $100 haircut. When you get a $100 haircut, you're increasing the perceived likelihood of getting the result that you want, versus when you get a $10 haircut, there's not much expectation that comes with that. The perceived likelihood of getting what you want is kind of lower because you're not paying as much money. What are your thoughts on that, Leigh? I know you have a lot on that.
Yeah, it's the psychology, isn't it, of money? But I'm just going to relate it to the hair world. I don't really feel like people understand that about themselves and the psychology of it. I think they only really, if we look at the scale of it, like as price goes up, the perceived likelihood of I'm going to get the thing gets higher. But I don't think they think about it on the way back down again. What I see in the hair world is a lot of consumers expect the same thing, whether they're paying $100 or $30. Now that's a sticking point there in value perception. Now the key word is perceived perception. It's not directly correlated to value. Now that's the psychological factor there. You know, I would love to know where people's perceived value is at when it comes to a $30 haircut. Now, in my mind, maybe this is just bias. I just have a bias towards it's going to be crap. Like, I don't expect anything out of it because my perceived value is, it's only $30. They're probably not going to spend a lot of time. Maybe they're skilled, maybe they're not, but I'm just assuming it's not going to be very good. And I'm okay with that. It's not a judgment. I will consciously choose if I want the $30 haircut or not. But I still do see this expectation of, oh, the $30 haircut has got to be as good as the $100 haircut, which is strange for me. You know, even for, like, look at us, right? Like we invest in ridiculously expensive courses and then ridiculously cheap courses. Like $9, I bought a $9 course. Now, I wasn't really expecting, it was more out of curiosity. I was like, I wonder what this is going to be like. I didn't have any expectations on it. I was just interested, and it was more market research. But I didn't go into it thinking this $9 course better make me $1 million, because we pay other coaches lots of money to give us that advice. Yeah, it's really interesting, and equally that's why I think the word perceived is so important, because even if you do buy the $100 haircut, it's also not guaranteed you're going to get what you think you're going to get, because it's perceived value. Now it's just a psychological marketing thing. That's all it is. The higher the price point, just generally, and I think this is a conditional thing through culture. This is probably something that's thousands of years old. What we've generally thought is, okay, it's higher in price, so it must be better. And that's it. It's just a perception, because I could tell you now there's people that charge a lot of money for haircuts who it's not better than some others, but generally across the scale, it works, but not always. And I think it's important as a consumer, and just anyone is a consumer of something, to realize that it's not always going to be better. Like clothes, I'm sure we've all out there bought an expensive t-shirt and it's fell apart quicker than your $10 Target t-shirt. So just.
Yeah. And it's often, there's two ends of the spectrum, right? When it comes to perceived value and perceived pricing. But like on one end of the spectrum, it's got nothing actually to do with us and what we deliver. If we're talking about the context of hair, from a psychological standpoint, some clients and some customers will just be happier to just pay the $100 and not really look at the haircut. But the fact that they've exchanged $100 for it has increased their perceived value of it. Whereas at the other end of the scale, at the cheaper end of the scale, $20, $30 haircuts, you'll get the types of clients that are looking for something that's wrong with it because of their psychological money story. So they know that they're not getting it. They really want the $100 haircut in terms of quality, but they only want to pay 20 or 30. So then they're going to be the fussy clients because they're going to micromanage service. So like there's so many psychological components to it, but it plays out differently on both ends of the spectrum. And yeah, we can influence that. We can influence the perceived value of what our services are worth.
Yeah. And I think the massive power comes when you can back it up as well. One of our coaches said this. He's like, and this is one of the coaches we pay a lot of money to. He's like, I hate perceived value. He's like, why don't we just give actual value? And I like that. It's like the magic comes when you can back it up. See, some people play in the perceived value space because they can't actually back it up. They just want to bring out this perception just to get the money. But when you can back it up, there's something powerful there. And there comes an element of freedom in how you can play with that service. It's like, let's take cars, Ferrari, Lamborghini, they're expensive for a reason. They're bloody good cars. I don't think they're going to fall apart on you. And they are as fast as they say they are. And they're as beautiful as they advertise that they are. But then at that point, because they can back it up, they can probably charge whatever they want. They have no qualms about putting their price up because they can back it up. Now, you imagine if we were trying to sell bloody Ford Focus at $250,000. It's like, yeah, the perception is, this Ford Focus must be better then. Because that's perception. But then when you actually get the thing, you're like, no, well, it's just the same as all the other ones. Damn. And that's where that can fall a little bit flat. So when you can back it up, damn, that's powerful. Because then we start to get this really good conditioning with our clients then, and that's when you can just hold on to them. And that's when you can start to build that price rise, because it's just, everything's just going to be easy for you. You want to put it up $20, $50, they're going to be like, well, you know what? He backs it up. It's bloody good. And it's hard to get anywhere else. It's bloody good. So I'm just going to pay for it. But if we're constantly trying to play this game of like perceived value and we can't back it up, it's going to get hard. And that's why, something we always say, and, in our coaching group and on the podcast, get good at the thing. I think whatever you do, it pays to just have that as like a backing track that's just playing in the whole of your life. Whatever you choose to do, regardless, always try and get better at the thing.
Yeah.
that's just like the background music of your life is like, whatever I'm doing, I'm just going to keep trying to raise the standard, because it's only going to pay off down the track. I think there's only upside on that, really.
Well, it's the foundations, right?
Eventually,
Like, it's laying the foundations.
Yeah. You end up getting into a lane of like one of one. You're great at the thing, and you get pricing power, and your perceived value is not just perceived value anymore, it's real value. And that's a deadly combo right there. Deadly combo.
Here.
So, speaking of value, I feel we should wrap it up there. It's a lot of value.
Tons of value in that one.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ideas 365.
Thank you. The reason I say that is because my iPad's about to die of battery, because we just did a skills webinar and we just did a coaching call with one of our coaches this morning who we just onboarded with. Tons of value in that episode, jam-packed with value. And now it's just about taking it and actually executing on it, and one step at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just trust the journey, allow one new thing to come in every single day. Take some of what we said just now and implement it into your lives. That's when the real power comes. And we'll see you next week. Any final words, Leigh?
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, all the good stuff that helps us to keep doing what we're doing. And would love to hear the bits of value you took and what are you going to implement into your life. Stay unlimited.